Once upon a time, there was a mountain that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. At its peak, the Flame People built their homes here, each dwelling a testament to their mastery over fire. In the heart of their village stood the sacred flame, a column of fire that reached toward the sky, fed constantly, never allowed to dim. For generations, the Flame Keepers had tended it, reading prophecies in its smoke and strength in its heat. At the mountain's base, winter reigned eternal. Here, the frost folk shaped their city from ice that never melted, carving spires from frozen waterfalls. Their world was blue and white and crystal clear. Between these two worlds hung a wall of steam, thick as fog, hot and cold at once, impossible to cross. Both peoples knew the boundary. Both peoples feared it. This was simply the way things had always been. Ember was 17 when the smoke began speaking to her. She'd been Flamekeeper for 2 years, since her mother's death. Every morning, she fed the sacred flame its wood. For weeks, she'd noticed something strange. The smoke no longer rose straight up as it should. Instead, it curled downward, reaching toward the steam wall, like fingers seeking something lost. Her grandmother Kenna saw her watching. She knew when her granddaughter was keeping secrets. Kenna spoke not to warn, but to remind. The boundary existed for a reason. Crossing it meant death. That night, she couldn't sleep. The smoke's message echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. Far below, in the world of endless winter, Frost was carving fire from ice. His grandfather, Elder Glacian, would stand in the doorway watching him work, head shaking in confusion. "Why do you carve what you've never seen?" Frost never had an answer. He only knew that when his hands shaped fire, something in his chest felt warm. Which was impossible, because nothing in the ice zone was ever warm. But Frost heard something else. Something restless. Something waking up. 3 nights after her grandmother's warning, Ember broke every rule she'd ever been taught. She waited until the village slept, walked past the last warm stones, and into the steam wall, where the air turned strange and the ground disappeared beneath clouds of mist. The boundary wasn't hot or cold. It was something else entirely, something her body couldn't name. She pushed through until she found solid ground, a flat space where the mist cleared just enough to see. The walls were covered in carvings. Ancient hands had etched hundreds of figures into the stone. Ember knelt, tracing the carved figures with trembling fingers. This was history no one had ever told her. This was truth that had been buried. She was so absorbed in the discovery that she didn't hear the avalanche until it roared. Frost had been hunting near the boundary, was finally close enough to strike when the ice shelf beneath him shattered. He fell through layers of old snow and new ice, crashed through the steam wall, and landed hard on volcanic rock, steam rising from the melting snow around him. Ember heard the crash, saw a boy crumpled on black stone, his skin pale as moonlight, his hair white as fresh snow. She dragged him to a hidden cave, built a fire at the back, far from where she laid him, tore strips from her own clothes to bind his wounds. His skin burned cold, but she didn't stop. Frost woke at dawn to warmth, real warmth, warm air in his lungs, warm light on his face. He should have been dead. Instead, he was alive, and across the small cave sat a girl with dark skin and long braids. Then the mountain spoke. A massive quake shook the cave. The entrance collapsed in a thunder of stone and dust, sealing them inside with only firelight and each other. Trapped. Days passed in careful silence. Ember kept to one side of the cave. Frost kept to the other. She fed the fire. He stayed as far from it as the space allowed. But something strange was happening. He wasn't melting. The heat that should have killed him was just heat. Uncomfortable, yes, but not deadly. And when she'd touched him to bind his wounds, his cold hadn't killed her either. On the third night, Ember took a burning branch and explored deeper. The cave stretched back further than she'd imagined, and every surface was covered in carvings. The whole story was here. How the two peoples had lived as one, how fire and ice had balanced each other, how gardens had grown in the steam between, how sickness came one terrible winter, killing both sides equally, how grief had turned to blame, and blame had become the boundary, and the boundary had divided the mountain for 100 years. Frost found her standing before the murals, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's when the cave floor split open. Golden steam poured through the crack, swirling around them, and in the mist, visions appeared. They saw everything the carvings couldn't show, the beauty of the united mountain, the tragedy of the sickness, the 100 years of slow dying, fire burning too hot without ice to cool it, ice growing too cold without fire to warm it. Both sides fading, both sides too stubborn to see. And Ember and Frost stood in the cave, breathing hard, knowing everything. They started digging together. Ember used fire-heated rocks to melt ice. Frost used ice to cool stones too hot to touch. 3 days it took to break through. When they emerged, both peoples were waiting at the boundary with weapons drawn. Then Ember walked down toward the ice zone, and Frost walked up toward the fire zone. And they met in the middle of the steam wall and joined hands. The mountain exhaled. Where their joined hands touched the ground, moss sprouted, then flowers, then grass and vines, a garden blooming in heartbeats where nothing had grown for a century. Everyone stopped, stared, watched as the boundary transformed from dead stone into living green. Grandmother Kenna moved, walked into the growing garden, stopped before Elder Glacian. Two people who'd lived their whole lives on the same mountain and never once met. She held out her hand. He took it, and the others followed. Flame people and frost folk, walking into the boundary zone, touching the plants, touching each other. No one dying, everyone alive. The mountain had been divided for 100 years. It took 3 days in a cave to make it whole. Ember and Frost became balance keepers, tending the gardens in the steam zone, teaching others that fire and ice weren't enemies. They were partners. The fire still burns at the peak. The ice still holds at the base. But now, between them, life grows, and the mountain is silent no more.
If you loved this story, subscribe to our channel for more magical fairy tale adventures. And keep the magic alive. Until next time, my friends.